And we're live. Welcome everyone to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. We'll be following along the agenda that was posted in issue 342. And I'll share the meeting notes doc for folks as they join. Feel free to add yourselves to the attendees list. Quick acknowledgement, code of conduct acknowledgement, please be kind and mindful on these calls and in all RFC comms in the RFC's repo, as well as all the other repos inside the NPM org. We ask that you please abide by our code of conduct, which is outlined there under our policies that's found on npmjs.com. Again, these calls are intended to hopefully move feature ideas as well as open up comms with the community and push features forward. Did any folks have any announcements they wanted to share? If not, we can just jump into the agenda. It's a bit smaller than normal. So the first item on here is PR or RFC 332, supporting yarn style commands. This was created by Orda, and we had a pretty good long discussion the other week on this specifically. Did somebody, who was the last person to poke on this? I think you said we had some updates. We could potentially speak to the changes and improvements that we're making in this space.
Yes, there is a pull request that I think is going to land tomorrow that updates a little bit of the language around the suggestions you get when you type npm run or exec or something, and it tries to spit out the usage. The did you mean output now shows top level, run, and exec. It differentiates between them. So we are working towards removing that ambiguity, because I know last week we talked about how there really are three things going on here. We don't want to collapse them into one, which is kind of what this RFC is suggesting.
I think that's a great synopsis. We can leave this, or go ahead.
I think that we should, we keep coming to the same decision. I would like to take an action item to document this decision and close this RFC. We are not going to collapse them into one way of handling top level commands. If we want a new top level command that does collapse them in some way, like, somewhat how npm exec sort of collapses local scripts, global scripts, and then new things that just got installed, like that's another conversation, which might actually satisfy Orda's request here, but we're not going to do the thing he's actually requesting. Like I don't see us changing on that. So we should just say, hey, we're reducing this ambiguity, and we are not going to do this other thing that you're wanting. Sorry, we've given it a fair hearing.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if Orda speak up to that last time, but one question I'd like to see an answer is there anything else we can do to at least satiate a little bit of the user experience that they're looking for with the RFC, right? I don't know if we explored that type of question last time.
Part of Orta's motivation seems to be that people think of NPX as installing things, even though that's not its only purpose. And I'm not sure if there's something that we could do, that NPM could do to fix that by like changing CLI behavior isn't going to affect user expectations guaranteed, right? Like NPX is already documented to do many things, including possibly install. And if users don't share that expectation, then better education does not require any CLI changes.
Yeah, so I don't think that the plan is to change NPX or to change the suggestion that you do npm install tsc npx tsc. I think what I'm suggesting here is you tell the person to run a command that will run the thing that you want them to run. And currently there's a shortcoming in our functionality because we don't have a way to say exec local, right? Also, the what we write to the terminal when you run npm tsc, and that's not a command we know, is not particularly helpful right now, right? We search the help and we try to give you some guidance, and it's pretty lackluster. What we could do is have that help output also say, that helpful output say, hey, you have a top level bin called TSC. If you ran this command, it would do maybe the thing you want.
So there's actually an RFC that's open. We're starting to get into that territory that NELF actually created an RFC specifically for. So
the bottom line is we're not going to do this thing that's being asked for. We're going to do something else that meets the need in a similar but distinctly different way. And I think that what we should do here is close it so we don't keep coming to that decision in every RFC call.
And I can help you out with taking notes, Darcy. And you're muted.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. Sorry, I was trying to pull double duty here. Thanks, Roy. Okay, so action item there, Isaac, is to let's document the decision, and we can move on. And I think that what spawned out of this is actually, a couple more of these RFCs that actually have more likelihood of us actually landing. So I still think it was great, and do appreciate Orta bringing this up again. So cool. Great. So moving on to PR number 325, or sorry, this was an issue 325, which was essentially a request for RFC. So essentially discussion on running pre-post install scripts on single package installation. We talked about this, I think, pretty extensively over the last, I think, 2 calls that we've had about the idea of like mutation events. And I don't know where we landed in terms of next steps, if that's something that we were going to create a separate like RFC for. Isaac, maybe you remember, or Jordan, you remember, I know you were involved in this heavily.
Yeah, I think this is, I don't think that the state of this has changed. We need an RFC for the node modules tree has changed in some way, type of lifecycle script. I believe that was, if I remember correctly, we had decided that like, let's finish, Gar was working on an exercise of kind of documenting and auditing all of our lifecycle scripts. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, and that's the README is now actually accurate.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think the way is cleared now for us to have an RFC that identifies that missing type of interesting event and assigns a new lifecycle event name for that. It should not be pre-install, post-install. It should be something different, because those are kind of already have like semantics attached to them, and expanding those semantics beyond the already fuzzy, problematically fuzzy state they're in now is not a great idea. It's going to make the situation worse, but we can add a new thing, and that's not particularly hard.
So
needs to be spelled differently.
Yes, I think that will help with the confusion, and it'll be more clear what you're actually like attaching to. Go ahead, Gar.
Another thing that came out of this is and there's no RFCs coming out of this yet, but a plan on the CLI team to move lifecycle scripts out of scripts, because there's some confusion there about, npm run does it, but if it runs as a lifecycle, it's another thing. Obviously, if we implement it in 7, it'd have to fall back. But the idea is we'd push people toward defining their lifecycle scripts in one place, and then the things that work on npm run in another. And if you need one to run the other, then the lifecycle scripts can just call npm run, right? So that's just another thing that's fallen out in our internal discussions. There's no RFCs yet, but that's kind of where we're thinking of moving, just as a heads up that this audience cares about things like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so in terms of this, do you want to keep it open, but maybe take it off the agenda and keep it open until we essentially have another RFC that supersedes it? Or just to essentially keep this as like a running debt that we have to pay down? Because otherwise, I don't think we have any sort of like backlog to do specifically for creating RFCs.
Is there a status for our issues saying, yes, this is now something we want to write an RFC for?
We could create a separate issue for it. Yeah, in this repo. So one of the two works for me. Action item for me, though, is going to be taking off the agenda label. So any other feedback on that? Any other commentary? Isaac? No.
No, I think we need to open an RFC for a new mutation event describing when it happens and what data is shared with it and in what way. The space to bike shed is that there's somewhere between a full and comprehensive description of like the diff object that Arborist generates, and on the other side of the spectrum, you get nothing. We fire it and you look at it and you do whatever you want.
And that's an implementation detail of like what data you get from the event versus just firing.
It's not,
I think the trigger, right?
It's
like,
not an implementation detail because it's part of the API surface for using this script hook. So yeah, for using this lifecycle event. So we just need to document what that is. I mean, I would push as hard as possible on the you get nothing because it's very future proof. It's prevents us from having to shim or backport any kind of breaking changes we make in what that diff object looks like. It frees our hands much more, but obviously it's less useful and it puts a little bit more work on the side of the user.
I would say the main difference there is if there's only one lifecycle event, then I can't know either the previous state or the next state, depending on when that's fired, right?
Well, there'll be a pre and a post.
Right. So assuming that there's a pre and a post, it is less useful, but is somewhat reasonable because then I can always look at what I care about and then look at the next thing.
Yeah.
Especially if Arborist provides some sort of diff where I could like back up the package lock and then, like if there's some trivial tools that I could opt into, then that preserves the future proofing without completely avoiding the convenience.
Yeah,
but that's something we can discuss later.
So yeah, pre would be you read the package tree and then you stash that somewhere, and then post you read the package tree again and look at the thing you stashed and you do a diff. I mean, that's kind of like the baseline. We could do that, right? We could do that today, and it'd be very easy and very unlikely that we ever break it. Somewhere in there's probably something where I could give you like an environment variable of the paths that are going to change in some way, or some other little clue that might be like a middle path that is still pretty easy and gives you at least part of the puzzle. But that's all something that should be hashed out in a new RFC.
Cool. And Jordan, you had a comment there in chat. Should have a general issue for stuff that needs an RFC. Is that?
Just if you happened to create one that was just a catch-all for things that need an RFC, I have things I've been meaning to write an RFC for that I would bullet point on.
I mean, you could just create an RRFC issue and assign it to yourself if you'd like.
Yeah, I have the time to write a bullet point. If I had the time to write an RRFC, I would probably just write the RFC. So
let's see. You're seeing the genius of my request here.
Okay. Thank you so much for the feedback there. That may be something that we do, but yeah, it might make more sense to just keep creating RFC or RFC tickets. Cool. Moving on then, 313, the issue the RFC for adding a method for help to have a config option. This is by Yesh Singh, who actually was the person who helped get the set script landed in, I think, 7.1. They helped get that over the finish line. I haven't taken a look at this. Isaac, I see you gave some feedback to this. Do you remember what this was for? So adding a method for getting help on the config option.
Yeah, that's, I'm sorry, I should have probably removed the agenda label there. That's something we should just do. We're in the middle of a pretty massive refactor of configs right now, so that our config help is all procedurally generated from the config definitions, and everything is in one place with the default, the description, the type, everything. Once that's done, it will be extremely easy to just dump the help output for one particular config option. So yeah, we could probably just close this RRFC. The only thing that I think might be kind of worth bike shedding, there are some config options that match a top level command. So if you ran npm help user agent, right? Like, I know that that's a config option and it's not a command name. If you ran npm help audit or npm help diff, okay, well, that's a config option that is also a command name. So how do you explicitly get help on that one config? But I mean, again, this could just be a pretty small feature addition. I don't think it needs to necessarily be a full-blown RFC.
Well, I would assume npm config audit -- help would give me explicit help for the config command.
There's a lot of ways to spell it. Yeah,
Like,
that would be reasonable. As long as we just kind of pick one and document it and make it work.
But my general expectation for every shell program of any kind is that if I tack -- help onto it, it doesn't do a thing. It only gives me help for the thing I tried to do, or something less granular.
Yeah, I think, Isaac, in your suggestion there, where it's showing the unhelpfulness of being too helpful, the problem is that it shouldn't say, oh, there's this other thing I know about, I'll show that instead. It should say, that's not a thing. Help config that works. Go type that, right? We don't, being too helpful would be anti-helpful here because of the thing you mentioned, where one's going to work and the other's going to work for something else and not give you the config.
Yeah,
so the right answer is not to be too helpful here.
But I'm also saying that npm help as a command is weird for me, because that's not a thing other things do. So like, it's fine if we want to make that more useful, but like the convention that I'm pretty convinced is very ubiquitous is -- help tacked onto any command in any position.
Yep.
So Git, I mean, we're following the pattern of Git, where Git help and then some command name shows you the full man page for that command name. And it's essentially the same.
But Git supports the -- help thing I'm talking about. And
yeah,
while, of course, there's always a Git command that somebody's never heard of, and I've never heard of Git help. But like, the fact that it supports both of them doesn't contradict my expectation, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a npm config help top level command, or if you set usage and config has another argument, then show the help for that argument. I have no opinions as to the shape of this bike shed. We're just kind of, the functional pieces will be there very shortly to do it. So
I guess the other thing I'd say in that is that generally in JavaScript tooling, I have seen -help or -help or -h. That's the kind of standard I've seen evolve. And so sticking with what the ecosystem has picked is probably a good choice rather than deviating from that.
Yep.
Cool. Mike, Agar, I see your hands up.
Yeah, just to say that the refactoring in our commands, the usage output, and this config, we're moving towards a place where supporting this should be something that just falls out of it, right? And as far as what flags make it happen, whatever. But yeah, we're not that far away from being able to actually get useful usage output versus something we just hand type and hope that covers all the bases.
Awesome. Okay, so unless there's some more commentary there, and feel free to add, again, comments back to the issue itself. I'm going to move on to the next agenda item we had, which was essentially just an update for workspaces. Roy, this is RFC 117. So I believe this is the management piece of the working with workspaces, I believe. Did you want to maybe comment on this?
I did had something I wanted to comment on, not the specific RFC, but an idea for another RFC, a bit smaller one that we had while working on implementing the first commands that are supporting the workspaces configs. So yeah, basically it's the idea of if you cd into the folder of a workspace and you try to run a command that we already support workspaces. So let's say npm run script. Right now we support npm test and the name of a workspace. So we should also be able to, if you navigate to the folder of that workspace, we detect that workspace is configured as a workspace of the top level package. And we're able to basically run the same thing as if you were running from the top level, naming that workspace package. So that is a separate RFC that I need to go write it. Probably right now it's going to be a good time to get it done. But it would be nice to start gathering some feedback ideas, any possible unintended consequences of that. But I think from the user experience point of view, it's the users already have that expectation. Like if I sit into a workspace and I run npm test, they already have the expectation of that working. So I feel this is more of a bug fix than of a sender major kind of change. But yeah, I would like to start collecting ideas on that.
So just to summarize what you're saying here, maybe in just a little bit different fashion, what we're noticing or what we're hearing is that when somebody is inside of a workspace directory, that's obviously like you're not in the root anymore. The expectation is that when they run an npm command, that will become workspace aware with the work that we're doing here. That it should run similar to, or if not the same as if it was run in the root of that project with the workspace flag set to that directory. Is that
precisely? Yeah.
Does anybody have any thoughts, feelings around that? This would be a bit of a change from, I know how we've discussed this over the last year or so, from if you cd into a workspace directory and you run npm install, the expectation there is that that's going to create the lock file there, that's going to install the dependencies there, that's like not going to know about the fact that it's actually a part of this larger project. Whereas now, the expectation is that if you're inside of a workspace directory, it's going to do this. The idea behind the RFC you're going to create would be proposing that this is the behavior now, is that it's going to work as if it was run in the root.
Yeah, because we see well, I mean, I've seen multiple issues, feedback from users, right? They just try to cd into the folder and they expect npm install something. They expect to be able to add a dependency to that workspace with that workflow. And that's totally not the case today. So I think enabling that workflow would be a much more positive outcome at the end than trying to tell users to not do that, right?
So I guess my only thought there is just how far do we go? We go all the way up? Do we continue to resolve and walk the, how far do you look for, because if you're nested the workspace, then where do we look for, I guess, the workspace definition and the package JSON to that workspace, right?
Yeah, I do believe Arborist already has some helpers that just recursively look up, trying to find. But Isaac can probably speak a little bit more to that specific functionality. But I think we go up as much as we can, and we try to find a package JSON with a workspace definition on it. And as soon as we find it, and it just corresponds to the path that we're currently running on, right? We can say that that's a match. Like this is a nested workspace of this top level, and get things basically fall into place, right?
Yeah, I guess the one, because we're kind of speaking hypotheticals because we don't have the RFC created yet, so I don't want to get too far down this road, but I can already see like some edge cases or issues where, you know, somebody's created a directory manually, they jump into that, or they've done npm. You know, let's say they've created a directory manually, they jump into that, and then they run an npm command to like install or add a dep to that workspace, and there's no reference yet to that workspace in the package JSON in the root. Then, you know, you obviously have a mismatch there, right? So that's just one edge case that I can imagine, like, you know, people will find people getting into some maybe unexpected behavior then still. But yeah, I don't think that's any different than what people are experiencing today with workspaces. So I don't know if it's any better or worse. So cool. Anybody else have thoughts, feelings about that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put up the actual RFC, and we can talk a little bit more over for next week.
Cool. Thank you. Cool. So moving on, PR and RFC 336, adding a where config to commands. So Nilf wasn't able to join, unfortunately, today. Although we've talked about this a little bit internally. And if I open up this, I also see that Roy, you've also chimed in a little bit. So, you know, maybe I can give a high level synopsis of what this is. It's essentially a config. As we were looking at npm config specifically, we noticed that there was only 2 locations where you're essentially able to edit your npm RC file, or essentially edit config, and one of them, and neither one of them was project level specific. So obviously this is some developer experience and ergonomics that we constantly get asked for, why people aren't able to modify their project level config. And so this, out of that kind of discussion about how that works, I think we exposed the fact that, you know, it'd be great to have the ability to define where we're essentially looking, where, like what location we're essentially like looking or running commands against. And so in this case, the proposal is to sort of expose the sort of 4 areas we typically look up or interact with the system. So it's usually at the project level, user level, global level, and sort of the built-in config obviously is not something that we're going to let you like modify, but those 3 global, user, and project level paths are something we want to kind of like bubble up to the surface. And yeah, anybody have any thoughts on introducing something like this? And I'll give folks time to read. And the introduction is scoped specifically to config and exec right now in the RFC. So nobody has thoughts or pushback?
So my only I mean I admit to kind of chat over this with Nilf directly, but my only concern, which maybe it's just not relevant, or we just deal with it some other way, but my only concern is that the word where is very vague, and we've gotten ourselves into trouble in the past kind of having config options and flags that do double duty. So for example, if we have a config called where that's used both for exec and for config setting, you know, like user doesn't make sense for where to run exec, you know what I mean? But it does make sense for where to set a config value. So I would almost prefer to have two flags, right? Like one for exec and another one for config, and have the names be unambiguous. So, you know, npm config set foo equals bar dash dash which config equals user, right? Like might be, it's a little more verbose, but and generally I do like things to be shorter and easier to type, but that would avoid a situation where, like, you know, we kind of have this sort of fuzzy boundaries between some of these config fields. And I might just be hypersensitive to that because I'm in the middle of, you know, refactoring how our configs work. But I think it's a worthwhile thing to consider.
Yeah, scope config is a real thing that I think we're trying to address, right? So
yeah,
our command specific config is a thing we're trying to address. I always go back to, at least personally, I always go back to the way that you can configure init as kind of an example of almost like we almost got there at one point, or like we have init dash author, init dash something else. And obviously that config means nothing to almost every other command, even though it gets passed around. So I'm not sure, like, I mean, I'm totally okay with us. I don't care what the flags are, actually. Like, I don't care if they're two separate or they're the same thing, or we change the name to like something to be more verbose and less maybe like easy to be confused. Reusing like something like where, as you said. But yeah, you know, like I'm pretty easy in this space as long as we support, I think, this capability. I'm excited. So Gar, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, so what we're really talking about here is not clobbering. I think we should leave where alone, but the flag, this is just for npm config, right? To tell it either when it's getting or setting, because I mean, we could reuse this for get too to see at what level. Yeah, I think this is just to bike shed the name and make sure that it's not going to collide with anything else we're using. Having the word config in it might seem overly verbose, but like the use case of this isn't going to be something that's so onerous that a little extra typing is going to hurt us. So, you know, config context might be what we want here, right? Because what we're describing is the config context, right? Is it global, user, project, or remote?
Yeah, I'm super easy on what the actual names are. Like it's has nothing. I really don't care about that. It's more so that I really want us to be able to introduce this in a flag that you can, specifically for config, that you can, which is really interesting because you could define this at the user level. You can define that config that you want actually npm config to respect the project level, and then but today you could get your npm config put to default to essentially being like project, like look, get and set at the project level. Because I feel like that, at least personally, I feel like that's the way it should be in npm 8 and going forward. But introducing the option to like configure it by default or in like a minor because we put it behind a flag is like a great first step to that. So I really don't care like what the flag is.
Yeah, I think by the time we're bike shedding the name, I think we're all in agreement that's a good RFC.
Cool. That's a good thing. Okay, so I'll leave that on the docket for now, and hopefully maybe even next week Nov can join the call. Moving on to the other RFC that he had proposed, which was and sort of in line with some of the discussion we've already had. RFC number 339, improving the command suggestions, or I believe this is the fallback output that we provide to users. I know, Jordan, you had looked at this, and Isaac had also commented on this. I think there's been some updates here, like in terms of the work that Gar, you've been doing, like the did you mean work that you've done.
Yeah, this can supersede that. This shouldn't block mine because it's just changing some output, but this will actually define what we're doing. So we can iterate on my PR with the RFC.
Anybody have any questions about what's being proposed here? Just improvements. This is just like cleaning up and making improvements to like the suggestions that you get when we don't know what you meant, because we don't actually know whether it was a command, whether it was a script, whether it was binary you're trying to execute. Like, Jordan?
Yeah, just I mean I think the spirit behind the comment, the one comment I'd made on the PR was the output should be as concise as possible while also pointing me as quickly as possible to the thing I really wanted to do. So if I see like 2 paragraphs of explanation, that's too much. But similarly, if I see a list of commands, but I don't know what they do, like what the difference is between them, that's not helpful either. So like, some sort of thing that's just like, that's not a thing, but here's some things that you might have meant. Ding, ding, ding. And then like what each one is. That feels like that would be very useful.
Yeah. Gar, did you want
I demo this.
Yes, we demo, not memo. Let's do it.
So here's my pull request right now. And based on that comment, I'm going to make the change I wanted to make, which is to remove the usage dump from the suggestion. Because if we know if we know how to suggest things, we shouldn't be dumping all that. We should either say, I don't know what you're talking about, or you could have been talking about these things, right? And this is in the pull. This is what it's going to look like in the pull request. If I run in npm st test, it's going to say, hey, did you mean one of these things? And you notice how because test is a top level, it doesn't also suggest npm run test. And then
Can
an
you
exec.
increase your font by any chance, or just zoom in a little bit for my terrible
also
eyes and large screens?
worth commenting here. This usage banner, when you just run npm with no args, is absurdly long. I mean, when there was 5 commands, it was perfect, and now that there's like a bazillion, it's a little
61.
absurd.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well,
and yeah,
I mean, now that we have those
if we have a
suggestions-
suggestion, let's not print quite so much junk.
Okay. So this is, unless someone throws a monkey wrench in here, this lands tomorrow. And then we also are trying to have the language help explain what NPX actually is. But yeah, that's
But like, if we have the suggestions, it feels like all the rest of it can be condensed to like a sentence or two that says like,
run npm-h for
run
more
npm
ideas.
-help exactly for the full output. Did you mean these? Something
Okay.
like that.
I will implement that today.
It doesn't necessarily need to block your thing, but just like,
No, that's 2 lines of code.
yeah, okay.
I'll lower my hand now. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
Guy.
The
Useful
suggestions
demo.
are great, so thank you.
Yeah, very useful
Yeah.
demo. Thank you.
And that brings us to essentially the end of the agenda we had. Was there, because we actually have some extra time, did anybody have an RFC or any items that they want to bring up?
Yeah, I actually have a few. If nobody has anything else that you want to jump into.
I see Orda also just joined, or info services. So maybe we can.
It's like I have no Zoom account that's actually just normal.
Yes, maybe we want to jump back into his RFC.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've been following along or if you are okay, coming in fresh.
Yeah, I spotted. I just saw my GitHub notifications now, and that there was also one that was related to. So consider me really out of the loop on what's changed.
Sure. So I think we want to essentially, sort of lament or the action item here is to lament, the fact that I don't think we're going to move forward with the fallback style that like copying sort of the implementation that Yarn has and sort of the RFC as you have it today. But in this call, I think we've explicitly talked about a couple RFCs that have been open since the last conversation, since the last 2 weeks, that we're trying to improve the help search and sort of the suggestions that we're giving when we don't know what you meant to run. So we want to essentially give clear, the action item is we'll give a clear reason why we're probably not going to move forward with like the yarn style fallback, but with the hopes, and not hopes, but with the understanding that we're also going to try to improve the experience of like npm exec, npm run, and
yeah. I think there was a tension with the idea that like a local exec, like running TSC, still required adding a script and doing a bunch of hoops to get to a point where you could have local without using npx. Sorry, I know that's the whole thing. Okay, yeah, I'll read up on all the stuff.
Bottom line, when somebody runs npm install tsc and npm tsc, it's not going to run tsc, but it will tell them what to do in a way that's a lot more useful than what we have today.
And is that like the equivalent of right now that might just be npx tsc, but maybe that could be npm/r or whatever.
Yeah. So the specifics of like what goes in, we did a little bit of discussion, and there's some open RFCs on like the specifics of what those, what that help output is. But essentially, we're going to get rid of the massive npm usage banner in cases where we made some kind of reasonable guess and say instead, did you mean npm run tsc, or did you mean npm exec tsc local, or exec local tsc or something?
Okay. I mean, it's generally a little disappointing because I still can't use that on TypeScript's website, for example. Like, other than
you have to tell somebody the full command that they need to run. But
okay, well, I'll see. I'll read up the docs and see how that turns out.
Okay. It'll be an extra couple of characters for you to put in your output, and yarn will look a little cuter in that case. But I think the trade-off is worth it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I know that I understand that like having taking over global domain breaks a lot of things in the future quite easily. I think it's a very reasonable constraint. Yeah,
and if you check out the other two RFCs that Nilf put together, I think that those also kind of help. Like, obviously, we have identified a problem here in terms of consistency and also the developer experience we want to improve. So, like, I think that what I'll say is like we really appreciate that you are poking on this, right? Like, because it's it's forcing npm to be better, right? Like in a bunch of different ways. So, yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you all.
Cool. So Roy, you said you had a couple items you want to also bring up here with the extra time that we had.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of discussions from the last meeting we didn't got to, but basically there was this feedback around resolve error message. Just basically, I think it surfaced on Twitter or something like that. But basically, people keep hitting resolve errors, and the solution is right there for them. The alternatives, right? Like run with force or legacy peer depth flags to try to unblock you if you can't do anything about your install tree. But yeah, people keep still being confused and what do I do with this? So the idea was basically the topic of the discussion is how we better highlight these actual action items to make sure we have the user still hitting those.
Is it a specific issue or topic, or?
Yeah, discussion. Yeah, in the RFC repo, I can paste the URL here. It's discussion 334.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if nobody has anything on top of their mind, at least maybe we'll get.
I mean, you do have to kind of read and interpret some English prose with that existing message, right? We could we could tell them what the
Formatted it
command is
differently.
because we know
Yeah.
what command you ran, right? Like it was just easier to put a static string in there.
So like,
So
do we
yeah,
think the formatting can be improved, or like the way that like it's like presented? I guess like I don't know.
we could just say fix the upstream dependency conflict or try one of the following commands and then print out what command they ran, and then we tack on dash dash force or we tack on dash dash legacy pure deps.
Right.
'Cause we're kind of in the
Like that
realm
would
of like
give them
NPM
something they can
explain,
copy
right?
paste.
Right? Because we're almost like
Yeah.
giving them a little bit of information, but like really it's like just tell me what to do, like maybe, and maybe we just let them, if they want to know what the actual problem was, we could rely on npm explain or like
Well, we can't
conflict.
rely on npm explain because it's not there in the tree, right? That's the point. We
Right,
gave
true,
up
true.
and aborted. But
Or
I
this
think
could be
having
log level differences that we could be relying on then.
I think
Like maybe-
printing out the explanation in the eResolve report is probably worthwhile. Like if it's your dep that's conflicting, I mean, I've talked to a few people who are like, "This is great. I had no idea that this bug was lurking here, and that would have broken a bunch of stuff, and we fixed it all." And I've seen some deps that were some of our early eResolve reports. Once we added those explanations, they just fixed it. I know Gatsby has been that's been a big project they've been up to. Like that's a net win for the community, right? That's improving things. I don't want to take that away, but also if it's not your dep and something crashed or it's not a dep you care about, then the reported fix should not require you to read as many words. It should be something I can be like, okay, let me try this, copy paste. Oh, that didn't work. Let me try the other one, copy paste. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I'm just also thinking about npm like audit warnings, right? Like so we don't display all the deps that essentially like that audited with that essentially have errors in them, right? Or vulnerabilities. Like we don't print that out by default. We just give you a nice like one liner about like that information and tell you like if you want to learn more, you can do this.
Well, when you run npm audit, we do that, but that's not something
install,
that's not
sorry.
right. So if you install and there were audit vulnerabilities, that's not something that prevents a correct resolution of the package tree. So the contract of npm install is when you run npm install, you get a package tree and node modules that satisfies this contract to this level that we have established, right?
I'm just trying to find ways to condense this information and make it actionable. And I'm wondering if like, can we utilize log level then? Like
if it's crashing, it is actionable. And we already downgrade the log level when it's just a warning, right? So it's log level warn rather than error. I mean, I think it's fine. I think that like the lightweight solution here of like, let's make a more useful suggestion block would probably prevent a lot of the Twitter issues that are popping up without taking away the bit of it that's actually useful.
That sounds good. Yeah. I think like just try this, then npm install or whatever was the command they used with the flags appended. Like
it'd be nice.
Way more helpful.
You know, one wild idea for user experience enhancements that sort of dovetails with the did you mean stuff. Like it would be nice if in that like final error handler, right? If we have a set of suggestions for things that we're suggesting maybe you should run instead, if we could make that interactive, that might be really cool. And I think if users were presented with a prompt that said, like, do you want to run this with force or do you want to run it with like pure deps? And they typed 1 or 2 or used up and down arrows or whatever, like we would probably get no responses because it'd be clear like, oh, I have to do an action here.
Install interactive.
I have to pick
like
one.
Yeah.
And similarly for, if I ran npm tsc and it said, well, did you mean one of these things? And like, I could press escape to just exit and do something else. Like that kind of is nice. And that also opens the door for like just pick option 1. right? Like if people really just want whatever are, want that like default shut up and do it for me kind of
Yeah.
behavior.
Press continue, continue, continue,
Mhm.
finished.
So I don't know, maybe that's kind of a, that's in my list of things that I've been meaning to write an RFC for. But I'm
Mhm.
waiting until after we have this did you mean stuff kind of a little more sparkling.
Yeah, I was trying to find Roy, I think you had an interactive issue or a RC or something a while back about making more commands interactive. I think you're just trying to get NTL or into npm somehow. I think you're trying to get
No, yeah, I'm not sure about
or
it.
IPT or NTL into
Yeah.
yeah, one of your deps as a npm dep. Just pipe
Yeah.
these and make it interactive.
There was one more fun discussion that
Sure.
popped up and was in the meeting agenda last time, which is the lock file version suggestion.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Maybe Isaac want to speak up to it. Maybe it's just gonna be a backlog item.
I think it's just a backlog feature request really, but the feature request was basically to make lock file version a configurable option. So I could run npm install -- lock file version equals 1, and it would save a lock file version 1 style package lock JSON file. Or alternatively, if I want to jump ahead into the future, I could do lock file version equals 3, and then not include all the backwards compatibility junk. So if I know that my whole team is working on npm 7 and we're not using npm 6 at all, I can cut the size of my lock file down by about like 40% or so, 35 to 40%, by just not including all the backwards compatibility stuff. So yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, and it's almost entirely in Arborist, except for the definition of the top level command. But what we could also do is only upgrade, never downgrade a lock file that we see. So if you're in a project that has a lock file version of 3 and your current configured lock file version is 2, we'll be like, okay, but this lock file version is 3, so I'm just gonna stay on 3. But it would still upgrade from version 2 so that subsequent installs could be more, fancy.
What happens when 4 years down the line, someone's still using npm 7 and log file version 4 or 5 is out and npm 7 doesn't recognize 4 or 5? Or npm 7 doesn't, yeah.
Well, I don't know, whatever version of npm has implemented lock style version 5. At that point, we've probably decided that we no longer care about npm 7 support.
Okay.
Presumably, enough. Like it's the same thing of like, what if you're using npm 8, which defaults to, let's say, a lock file version of 3. Mm-hmm. So there's no backwards compatibility for npm 5 and 6. It is what it is. Like, we've dropped support for that. If you want to maintain support, you can set it to 2 explicitly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool.
We have a couple minutes left. Anybody else have any thoughts? Anything else they want to share? Any announcements for folks that might have just joined? No.
Only thing is just a request on getting refreshed eyes on the audit license RFC. I just like to whatever the next steps are, even if it's closing it, just any kind of next steps there, or rewriting it completely. I'm fine with that. I'm happy to do it this week, or whenever it works for y'all, whenever you're all able to get that feedback. But that's the only one.
Which one is that? Do you know the?
That's 182. I commented on it at the end.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think auditing licenses. If I remember correctly, when this was created, npm 7 had not yet been released. Yep. But I think now we kind of have all that info in the in the package lock and in the tree as we read it. So it would be a lot easier to implement now.
For sure.
We're essentially at time. Appreciate everybody jumping on today and had some good discussion for sure. Feel free to keep adding comments and keep proposing RFCs. This is great. This is helping us a lot. And I think that, NPM is improving because of it. So thank you so much. Hopefully see you all next week, same time, same place. Cheers.
Later.